We've covered lots of different sort of questions of balance. The balance between local and national. Is it infrastructure? Is it usage? Are we focusing on the cutting edge or on just spreading good practice everywhere? And the next half hour or so, we're going to try and talk about drawing out some of the sort of practical implications of some of those debates. Given the timing, we're going to try and keep this pretty snappy. So I'm going to begin by asking each of the panelists just to say who they are and to get in their first one or two messages before I ask them more difficult questions. And I think maybe we'll start at this end. So over to you, Graeme.
Thank you. My name is Graeme Gordon. I'm the CEO of a company called Internet for Business, IFB. We're an Aberdeen-based, UK-operating internet service provider, so we've got a great deal of interest on digital infrastructure in all forms. We're also a cloud service provider. We're investing £12 million in a new data centre in Aberdeen also, so the digital economy in Scotland and the UK is of great interest to us. We had quite a lively backstage debate just before coming to the table, so we don't think 35 minutes is going to be enough. But actually, some of the points that we're getting to is where is the technology leading us and how do we get to that end result? And we try to grapple with sort of three main points as a panel. And sort of vaguely around people, process and places, but there are other elements to that as well that hopefully the rest of the panel will cover off as well.
Great. I'm Tacis Gavoyannis. I work for Living Planet. We're involved in smart cities, and we were involved also with the Glasgow bit here. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the city to demonstrate to the rest of the world what can be done. Living Planet uses the technology that's come out of the McLaren stable, that's the racing cars. Lots of sensors. Of course, they're going around the track very fast. And what happens is there's a lot of data that comes off the car. There's about 3,000 sensors on the car. Obviously, they're going at tremendous speed, using existing network, feeding that back into the control point. And from there, they can decide whether the fuel is sufficient, the speed is at the optimum level, they can optimize the software. It's a great way of taking that technology and applying it into smart cities. I read Susan's report, the Digital Scotland 2020, and I think it's phenomenal that you've got a clear vision going forward. By the way, who's read that report, Digital Vision 2020? You need to read it, guys. There's only a few. But there is a scenario there that says, in fact, there's a lot of use cases. One that I will use, which is the mobile device. As you get out of bed in the morning, it guides you towards your meeting, gives you information on the way of getting there using the transportation, gives you an update on something that's gone wrong en route, decides whether you need a smart car and pays for it. All of that stuff actually goes on. And towards the end of the day, as you're heading back from your meeting, it decides that the weather is fairly clear, therefore you can take the bike and bike back home, get your exercise in. Now, who believes that that is doable by 2020? A few more than read the report. That's interesting. Actually, using our platform and the technologies we have at our fingers today, we can probably do a pilot of that in the next 6 to 9 months. So the message I would leave is the technology is here. It's just being able to pick that up and commercially make it available. So I'll hand over to Susan.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Tacis. So I'm Susan Sweet from Broadband Access Strategies, and I was one of the co-authors of the report that Tacis has referred to. And what the report was about was looking at 2020 and coming up with a first pass at a vision for 2020 for what Digital Scotland would look like. It isn't the end. It was really meant to be the beginning and the discussion point, and a lot of what I've actually heard today reflects a little bit of what's been in the report, so that's really quite good. And we did do several vignettes of what we thought 2020 might look like from both processes and applications, how people would work and live point of view. And we put in quite a few potential sort of recommendations actually for the Scottish Government as well. And so that's really what I'm here for. It was just interesting to hear a little bit in many of the earlier discussions around the processes and the institutional barriers that are part of what we look at, cultural barriers, etc. as well. But I won't go on now. But do read the report. It's very good.
And it's on the Scotland's Digital Dialogue website,
Yes,
which
exactly.
is worth
That's right.
getting onto too.
It has
Sorry.
a 4-page executive summary.
It is free.
Hi, I'm David Coyne. I'm Head of Economic Development in Glasgow City Council. And the economic development remit in the council spans support for SMEs as well as skills and training initiatives, and critically a number of strategic economic growth projects. We've spent the last couple of years with an industry-led group looking at the key sectors in the city and looking at what the constraints on the growth in those sectors is, whether that be access to finance, markets, people, technology. And the work of that Economic Leadership Board is really informing our economic development strategy. And there are a couple of major initiatives which we're trying to push forward, one of which is the Future Cities Demonstrator, which has been mentioned. Another one is Digital Glasgow, which is a broad-based set of initiatives. It's not really a single project. It's a sense we're trying to weave a story across the organisation to try and nudge forward things like online public services, trying to nudge forward our business development programmes to make them more digitally sensitive. We're trying to encourage the development of more wireless capacity in the city and a range of other things, including benchmarking with other cities where we've got a strategic partnership with Microsoft. So we're really trying to embrace this programme of work in all parts of the organisation and just take a step forward where we can.
Good afternoon. I'm Malcolm Taylor. I'm here to, if you like, present the fairly newly formed think tank. It's been around for about a year now, called the Foundation for Information Society Policy. It involved a group of people that got together over a period of time, including quite a few people from the business user community who are basically saying the sort of overriding policy within governments at the moment probably needs more work, needs more long-term vision, and it needs to raise a few, shall we say, fairly radical bits of new thinking to make sure that we cover off the needs of our growing market community. The key thing is that we are probably looking to try to become, or urge governments generally to become more ambitious about the what we would call a service level floor. It's all very well talking about high-speed targets, but I think we've got to start to look very seriously at how we get a service level floor to the whole of the community rather than to maybe 90% of it. There we are.
Okay, thanks. I mean, you could argue that from some of these contributions from the panel and over the day, that we're getting to grips with infrastructure. The technology's there. So what is the role of government? Where should the priorities be? What's going to make the biggest difference going forward in areas where the market can't, where the market's not going to do it for us?
I think at this point, when you're seeing Glasgow's digital and creative cluster and hub being recognised and identified and invested in, when you see a trade body like Scotland IS trying to make Edinburgh as the high-tech startup hub in Scotland, you've got the universities in Scotland led by RGU in Aberdeen trying to create that big data innovation centre in Aberdeen. So there is a groundswell now. We're almost getting not quite a perfect storm, that government seems to get what industry is trying to do, and then government should be starting to strategize that with firm goals and objectives. It's got to be measurable, as being said at the end there. There's no point in saying 100 meg to the house and everybody gets fibre, because that just can't happen. But I think the measurables that have been introduced, I think we've got an incumbent in BT in the UK who's had a pretty hard time. I think it's been deregularised in a pretty terrible way, actually. So Ofcom are also struggling to get their hands around how that is regulated into the future. But actually, when you look how we perform against the other 4 major economies in Europe, we're performing pretty well. The incumbent performs pretty well, our regulation performs pretty well. I think now is a time for leadership, and the strategy and leadership and deliverables and support from government is now the right time, because industry is here, we're right up at the plate now. I think government probably has got a big part to play.
It's very interesting, the point about targets and being precise. I think one of the issues here is a target that looks okay today may look rather stupid in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy ask. But David, you're going to...
Yeah, I think in addition to taking a rational planning approach, I think you also need to identify small-scale deliverables which actually just make real sense. And for me, the best bit of e-government and the thing which has driven me as a consumer to use an online service compared to in the real world service is taxing your car. I mean, who would go and stand in a queue in a post office now that you can do it online? Mm-hmm. And if we can replicate that kind of attractiveness across other major bits of government services, whether it's doing an online tax return, if indeed you have to do one, or voting online, but if we can start to shift real things that real people have to take real time out of their life to do and make them easier, I think that will drive behaviour as much as strategies.
And maybe use some of the budgets. We heard today that there's 12 billion UK for sterling for the NHS. There's a couple of billion kicking around in other projects. Perhaps he can use some of that to incentivize SMEs and get them to access that. And again, we used some of our activities and platforms to enable two people operations, write software against the platform which can access that cash. It's important to get that innovation going.
And I think I would add to that, it's getting everyone together. I know when we wrote this report, some of the feedback we had, particularly around participation, is there are a lot of different groups doing things, and this came out quite a bit today. And perhaps there needs to be an overall, dare I not say centralised, but an approach so that the big picture is seen by the government, because there's lots and lots of things going on, and perhaps it's not as well tied together, dare I say that, as it could be in some ways, if you know what I mean.
I mean, the combination of tools that people can use and networks which are effective, but actual local action, it feels like quite a powerful proposition.
Well, it's there is a lot of energy around, and we've seen it today. But then you look at the government structures, and this is a sort of a generic comment. If I look at the way Westminster looks at these issues, it's got a national infrastructure plan that's seemingly controlled by the Treasury, cyber security by the Cabinet Office, it's got policy by DCMS and BDUK by DCMS, it's got rural broadband under a different government department. There is, as you were saying, there's not an umbrella perspective, and we've got to try and get the critical nature of what we're talking about higher up the political agenda. I thought Nicola today came across very strongly, and this is central, at a high level within government, enthusing about the importance of all of this. We can't allow it to drop, and we've actually got to, try and become more cohesive and more umbrella-like, if you like, in terms of its significance.
And I think we would argue that in Scotland, we're better placed to pull strands together within the devolved powers, simply because of scale and a degree of alignment across public sector bodies, which is harder to achieve. And I mean that is one of the things we need to... I'm sorry?
That's my observation from today.
Good. Can we maybe shift from that issue of priorities to some of the issues about organisations and people, and what we need to do in order to equip the workforce, public-private sector, to actually be able to grasp these sorts of opportunities? Because I think what's come through the day is that you've got the technology, you're probably going to have the infrastructure, but are we equipped to pull it together? I don't know who wants to start on that.
If I may, I think in Scotland we're producing something like 1,700 computer science graduates a year. There's between 7,000 and 9,000 jobs in the ICT digital sector at the same time. So when you take all this infrastructure, what will really drive demand is usage, content, data, turning that data into information, smart technologies, digital, creative industries, gaming, all these things that have been dirty words are not recognised until very recently at a very high level, on a strategic level. And that's indicative of the STEM activities anyway. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics are not sexy. People are not, and I mean that in the most horrible way. People are not gravitating towards those as a life choice or a career choice. Partly because some of the engineering jobs and maths jobs and technology jobs and science jobs are not sexy, let's face it, but how do we get people involved in the digital future of the economy? And it has to start in education. It has to start as early as we can, so we had the discussion earlier in the panel, when do we stop, when do our children, or when do we stop as individuals stop multitasking? Because we've all got teenagers that are on their phone, watching the TV, online, reading a book, texting, Skyping, 3, 4, 5 things at the same time. So their ability to absorb multitasking and get things done really quickly and work around problems in everyday life using technology, data, whatever else is there. I think we unwire ourselves to do that rather than we don't do it. I think we could have all done it at 13, 14, 15, but not so much now. Getting in there at education and getting people involved in actually the mechanics behind pushing a button, taking the data from 3,000 sensors in a car and making it information that you can commercialize, or R&D, or any of these areas, is really important, and we're missing something just now, I believe.
I think you're right, actually. If I can add on to that, you start with education, you have to. If you want to do a step change, you really need to start there. You follow through with university and all the innovation that will come out of that, and you follow through with an SME. Enable them to be able to move into smart cities that we're building, which we'll enjoy, but certainly the younger generation that's going to stretch to the limit, understand, push, and morph and evolve to what they want them to be. So certainly I think that's quite important to put that funding into that element, because then you've got to stop it into the IT not moving forward. And then going forward, enjoy what we have today, because I still remember the days of dial-up, the days of very clunky PCs, and certainly the days where the phone was the size of this bottle. So, celebrate what we have, but actually do some difference by letting the younger generation take that forward 10 times faster than we can.
The modern challenge is keeping up with your email, your Twitter, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, all at the same time. That's what I find as a challenge. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking as far as sort of other processes. I mean, the institutional side of things, what we've seen in a lot of research that we've done is that work practices take a long time to change. Management doesn't necessarily want to change the way people have to come into work. There was that thing recently in the States. And that's a cultural shift as well. So the more we see, I suppose, homework and teleworking, that was talked about this morning, where a government is obviously promoting that, so you do trust your people to work at home. But all that takes a long time to change, and even if we have anything, anytime, anywhere, people are still going to want to see some people in the office, etc. And I think there's other cultural issues that have to be accepted. And we were talking actually earlier about healthcare, and the example of if you call up the Healthcare 24 people, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and you want advice, and you need advice quickly. And I went through this, and I called up, and I needed advice, and I went through 100 questions, and they said, yes, do this, do that. But they don't tell you in the beginning that you're not speaking to a doctor or a nurse, and you have to go through a process. So you go through this, and then a couple hours later, I have to phone again. And I go through the exact same process again. So there isn't a system in place where you can say, okay, I called before, my name is this, and I don't have to go through. And you go through this, and it's a waste of time and effort, and you're stressed. And it's just one thing that really needs to be looked at as far as how you might use information more effectively, I suppose, in a sense. And again, it's an institutional way of using information. And
Yeah, I think going back to the point about education, it's interesting if you look back over 30 years at the content of what we teach in schools. I remember the year I left school, the school bought an Apple computer, and immediately it was all the maths geeks who got on it and took it apart and started writing code. And now when I look at my kids are learning in school, it's not actually about how to design or make technology or software, it's how to use it. And it would be really useful, I think, to get back down to strip it down, how does it work, take it to bits, build it again, because actually the skills of the use and application of technology are effectively becoming de-technologized. You don't need to know anything about computers to use them anymore. That was how it was in the 80s, not now. But I think what we need to be, if we want to get this flow of young people into STEM subjects and into innovating in small firms and innovating as they spin out of university, they need to be treating it like a Meccano set and just taking it apart and trying to break it.
The One of the challenges of a number of these comments is even looking at 2020, some of the kids today will just be coming out of school then. What are the things we can do more quickly in order to build that change in the way in the workforce?
Me again. Engagement's a big thing. I mean, I think that now we're now using the word digital instead of broadband. We're not using connected anymore because the kids who are 18 now, are 18 in 2020, are not calling it social media or e-business. It's business and it's social. They are already thinking that is an everyday part of what they're doing. So how do we give them more immersive as they're going through their decision-making years about their education and their career? How do we immerse them in technologies? The East Coast of Scotland's got some fantastic stuff going on in software, what we're doing in Glasgow just now, what's happening in Edinburgh. There are loads of opportunities to actually for business and organisations to come forward and offer a more immersive environment for people who are the geeks or the nerds who can make the difference in the next 10 years. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, as you've quite correctly identified there. But government now gets this properly, I think. For the first time ever in Scotland, government now gets this agenda properly. What you're going to struggle with is the delivery of it, and that needs a public and private sector partnership to educating. And it's not just, we're having the discussion earlier, it's not just a young person's thing. There's a lot more people over 30 in the room than under 30. But that education part shouldn't stop. It should be a continuous thing. How do we get more people on board more of the time? And the technology will help us do that. Video, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, apps, it will help us. And there's a great opportunity, as I say. I think we're in a great place as a country just now.
I can add one more, actually. I think from my point of view, I agree with that. But I would start somewhere else. I would probably own up what we cannot do or we're not capable of delivering to them. So we're looking at smart energy, we've got panels, we've got quite a lot of the technology there, but we haven't figured out how to store it. So perhaps own up and say, look, maybe you take that mantle and move it forward. How do we store that energy of the sun and do something with it? We've got electric cars up to a point, but it's not quite inspiring yet. The same with e-health, the same with e-learning. Own up and say, here's some of the sets of problems that we're dealing with and we can't get our arms around. Help us. Just give those problems to them. Because again, if I look at the youngsters, they take the, again, pushing the brand Lego, but they'll take the Lego bits and they'll find across the room someone that's got a bit that kind of is interesting for them, pair up with them, just produce something. In our case, I think we all have a Lego piece in our pocket. Nobody knows what color it is, what shape it is. We're trying to guess each other's bit. The youngsters share a lot more, so perhaps own up the issues that we're faced with and engage them to help us.
I mean, you come in, Malcolm, but you might pick this up at the same time, which is, are there good models or examples of the way in which that sort of extracting from the younger generation innovation has actually worked effectively? I mean, that's a...
Do you want me to kick an example?
I've done? Go on, and then I'll come in after you.
Yeah, I mean, just to, there is a design Ventura competition, and I think recently, about a month ago, I saw a winning team having a set of gloves that, as you're on the push bike, by the time you just close your hands on the grip, there's actually LED lights on top of it, so you've got a fairly good light going forward as you're on your bike. So they were not restrained by the cost of battery or the battery life cycle. So they will look at some of the problems, come up with a good solution, and then we probably pick it up and say, okay, I can do it cheaper, I can do it with a better battery, and so on and so forth. So there are examples of their ability to move things forward.
I think the point I was just going to make is trying to distinguish between the skills you need for designing something and the skills you need for building it. And the education system we're talking about is possibly looking more towards the build rather than the design. And I think you can solve the design skill issue fairly short term. The build issue, the technology, may be a slightly longer term thing, but you can always contract the build out or import the resources to build. The design is the innovative bit, and probably the area that the younger generation can help with almost now.
I mean, if you're looking at geographical areas that are doing it well, you've got to look to China. You've got to look at that which started off as copyright infringement, mimicking, replication, is now generating some really innovative tech. I mean, massively innovating tech at a software and a hardware level, because they're getting two Lego bits together, it works, look, we'll spew it out and we'll do another, and it's a commodity thing, and that's what we're competing up against. We're not competing with Cambridge, we're competing on a global stage because that's what our platform delivers. I mean, whether you like it or not, that's where the competition's coming from, that there's a continual evolution in the Chinese market and what they're producing, both in product. They're not great at service, but they're tremendous at flooding the market with product, and it's innovative enough to get your attention. The majority of it's not right, but it just needs 5 or 10% of it to be right, and that's the game changer.
And I think in China it's interesting that they've already nominated 90 smart cities. They have the budget already allocated from central government. And this, by the way, are 1 million plus cities, and some are completely new. So you do have a different model where the government will come in and just fund completely from scratch. And again, although they will have the critical mass and the funding, they're looking to us to say, what intelligence can you help us with? What innovation, what design, all those skills. So Glasgow, again, being the first smart city, is very important to them. It's very important we succeed. It's very important that we probably educate them. So that there is a good role here. Maybe we get scale that way. Maybe we get paid back for things we consult out to them.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned smart cities quite a lot today, and the Glasgow demonstrator. From your perspective, Dave, what does success look like with the demonstrator? What would you see as the real change coming out?
Okay, at the simple and most obvious level, it looks like the photograph of the control room in Brazil. It's an ability to look across transport management information, CCTV footage, environmental data, train and bus data, and all of those things, and integrate them and have a public-facing dashboard of information, so you can reroute yourself, your business, you can work around issues that emerge. But behind that is the real opportunity and the real richness to use large-scale anonymized data sets, whether it's about movement of people, flows of human beings around the streets, whether it's about modelling in transport systems to ease congestion, whether it's about energy performance in buildings, and it's making that data available and open so that people can experiment with it, for one thing. And that can help to drive innovation and business opportunity. I was in a conversation recently with someone from the NHS, which demonstrated the value of large data sets, and it's about the development of stratified medicine, where you're combining gene mapping data with chronic illness data, tissue banks, to develop very, very specific drugs for individuals. And it's a happy accident that the NHS started creating patient records in a particular format some years ago that allows the NHS in Scotland to have a huge advantage in now being able to do the drug development in that way. And who knows, it may just look like dots moving around on a map just now, but if you let some kids free on that with a PC, they might actually make something astonishing out of it.
And I mean, one of the things which you look at from the point of view of the opportunity for Scotland, we have the Glasgow Futures demonstrator. We have a digital health innovation centre. We have a proposal going forward which is very promising in relation to a big data innovation centre. When you put them together, that begins to feel like a bit of critical mass in that area, and feels to me as if it's a really important dimension.
And so what we need to do to capitalise on that is create the experimentation space, whether that is incubators in the traditional sense of a desk and a phone and access to the data with some mentoring and perhaps early stage proof of concept finance, and there are some experiments going on around that. It's also about bringing large organisations, the kind of world leading global players in to interact with SMEs and graduates and others, and just creating the spaces in which all of that can happen.
So I'll ask you one last question, which is the original sort of digital dialogue was really about what's the sort of infrastructure we need for a successful digital nation in 2020. Just a closing comment for you, how big a place do you see infrastructure in terms of government activity in going forward? Start that end this time.
Well, as you might imagine, I see the infrastructure debate as pretty critical, and it's not a case of arguing that build it and they will come. I think, and it isn't a chicken and egg situation, as some people say, infrastructure has got to be there and it's got to be universally available. So that's important. I am not convinced that as much state money needs to be put into infrastructure financing as some people would suggest. I think the problem we've got is that many of the business plans have to be relatively short-term, yet infrastructure is a major long-term investment profile, and the business models need to look at the returns over maybe a decade rather than any period shorter than that. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are probably models around that it can be achieved without as much state intervention. The state money can be spent much better in other ways rather than necessarily funding infrastructure.
Okay. As a general approach, I think it's a small enough place that if there's excellent infrastructure here and there that we can get to, that's good. That's better than mediocre infrastructure everywhere. So I think it's about getting the right things in the right place.
Okay, and from the report point of view, our first pass was to say the infrastructure that's planned to be there from up to 2015 is there. And then what we said was, what additional infrastructure might you need in order to have what Nicola referred to this morning as the anytime, anywhere availability of anything you really want to do, without being specific about how that's provided necessarily. But the fact that you do have to have that sort of underlying connectivity everywhere to some degree in order to have the vision as we've sketched it out. So I'm ducking it a little bit, but there you go.
That's fair enough. You could almost be a civil servant.
That's my next job.
I think looking at come back to McLaren again, looking at the race, I think one race will create, just with a few cars, a terabyte of data. Play that forward to a smart city, you're going to need a fairly chunky infrastructure. Maybe the governments take a view and say, I've got 4 or 5 operators on the wireless side, I've got 3 or 4 operators on the broadband side. I'll make it worth a while to get the bits of Lego together and produce something intelligent to drive smart cities. So that's one decision for the government to do, and as a government of Scotland, they can do that. So I think the analogy of race cars, you've got the youth generation that will take all the capacity you can afford them with their applications, with their new ways of doing things. So yes, there will be a huge demand on the infrastructure. I don't think we can dodge it by competing with each other. We just need to be a bit different. So I think more capacity and more need.
You get the last word, Graeme. Very dangerous.
Yeah, thanks. I think taking from there, so personally, operationally, I think there's enough capacity there just now for the areas that really demand it rather than perceive that they need it. There's a smarter way to use the capacity and roll it out, because I believe that ubiquitous broadband or connectivity, let's take broadband out of it, ubiquitous connectivity at a very high level is not achievable. And I think it's a very good point about funding. I think that the 4-year electoral process inhibits long-term sustainable infrastructure investment. And we should be looking at 4, 8, 10, 12 years and allocating an ongoing amount of revenue, budget spend at a government level in digital infrastructure for it to progress and improve over a long period of time, because this is not a 2-year fix. This is something that is generational, and that takes a major change at government level. We appreciate that as a business, but I think that's the right thing to do. You're being hamstrung by a 4-year get votes process because that's how it is, and nobody can change that. But longer term investment, smaller, longer term investment, OPEX rather than CAPEX, I think is the winning solution. How you manufacture it, that's back to you.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
I think it's an interesting sort of sense that in some respects, the money matters and government money will be needed, but actually it's the way in which we help orchestrate the relationship between the public and private sector, between private and public players, and actually set out the sort of longer term a sort of a consistent view of the longer term, recognising actually that in 6 months' time we may have a technology which will significantly affect exactly where we will go. I think from my perspective that's quite a sensible place to end, because apart from anything else, it justifies the discussions that we've been having today, which try and draw a lot of those points together. So I would like to end simply by asking you to thank the panel very much for their contributions.